The silence in Harold Brennan's marble-floored office felt heavier than the Gulf waters pressing against our drilling platform 200 miles offshore. I stood there in my work clothes, oil-stained boots, contrasting sharply with the Persian rugs as the man who owned half of Texas's offshore drilling operations delivered news that would shatter my world. Tommy, his 26-year-old son, who couldn't tell a pressure gauge from a coffee mug, would be taking over my position as lead engineer on the Gulf Horizon rig. 8 years of flawless safety records, three industry innovations, and countless lives saved meant nothing compared to sharing Harold's DNA. 6 months earlier, the Gulf Horizon had been my second home, a floating city of steel and determination, rising from waters so deep you could stack the Empire State Building twice and still not reach the surface. Every morning at 5:30, I'd walk the deck, checking pressure readings while the sun painted the endless ocean in shades of amber and gold. The rhythmic hum of machinery provided the soundtrack to my daily ritual of ensuring 32 souls stayed safe another day. Frank Rodriguez had been my anchor during those early years when proving myself meant working twice as hard as any man on that rig. At 45, his weathered hands told stories of 23 years wrestling oil from the Earth's depths. He'd taught me that pressure wasn't just numbers on a screen, but a living, breathing force that demanded respect. "Diane, you've got an instinct for this work that can't be taught," Frank had told me during my first major crisis 3 years ago. A pressure spike had threatened to turn our drill site into a geyser, but I'd noticed the subtle pattern in the readings that everyone else missed. The solution came to me like muscle memory, adjusting valve configurations in a sequence that saved the operation. Sarah Chen had joined our team 2 years later as safety coordinator, bringing fresh perspectives from her previous work on North Sea platforms. At 38, she possessed the rare combination of technical brilliance and genuine compassion that made dangerous work feel manageable. Together, we'd revolutionized the rig's safety protocols, reducing incidents by 70%. My personal life had found its rhythm too. Jake Morrison would meet me during my shore rotations, his research vessel often crossing paths with our supply boats. As a marine biologist studying the Gulf's ecosystem, he understood the delicate balance between industrial necessity and environmental protection. Our conversations stretched late into Houston nights, his passion for ocean conservation matching my dedication to safe drilling practices. The morning Tommy Brennan first stepped onto our platform, his designer safety gear screamed inexperience louder than any introduction. Fresh from Louisiana State University with a petroleum engineering degree, but zero practical knowledge, he carried himself with the entitled swagger of someone who'd never felt the rig shake beneath his feet during a storm. "I'm here to learn the family business," he announced to our morning crew meeting as if the Gulf of Mexico was his personal inheritance waiting to be claimed. I'd initially tried mentoring him, explaining how pressure systems operated like the planet's circulatory system, carrying immense forces that could either power civilization or destroy everything in their path. But Tommy showed more interest in impressing his father during surprise visits than understanding the complex mathematics that kept us alive. The pivotal moment arrived during a routine pressure test on a new well section. I was monitoring readings from the control room when alarms began chirping warnings about abnormal fluctuations. Through the reinforced windows, I watched Tommy approach the main pressure manifold, his movements suggesting confidence he hadn't earned. "Tommy, step away from that system," I called through the intercom, but he waved me off with the dismissive gesture of someone who'd never seen what happened when pressurized drilling mud found an escape route. He began adjusting valves without consulting the established sequence, his modifications threatening to destabilize the entire pressure network. The readings on my screen shifted into dangerous territory as 20,000 pounds per square inch of force searched for weakness in our containment systems. Harold's helicopter appeared on the horizon at precisely the wrong moment. Tommy, spotting his father's arrival, accelerated his unauthorized adjustments, determined to demonstrate his capability. The pressure reading spiked beyond safe parameters, as drilling fluid began forcing its way through relief valves that weren't designed for such stress. My fingers flew across the control panel, implementing emergency corrections to counteract Tommy's modifications. Years of experience guided my responses as I rerouted pressure flows and activated backup systems to prevent what could have become a catastrophic blowout. Within minutes, the reading stabilized, the alarms fell silent, and potential disaster transformed into apparent routine operation. Harold's inspection found everything functioning normally, his son standing proudly beside the equipment that had nearly killed half our crew. Tommy's explanation painted himself as the hero who'd identified and corrected dangerous pressure variations, while I watched from the control room, invisible in my moment of actual heroism. Excellent work, son. Harold beamed his approval, worth more to Tommy than the lives he'd endangered. This kind of quick thinking proves you're ready for greater responsibilities. Frank caught my eye from across the platform, his expression mixing admiration for my quick response with disgust at Tommy's credit theft. Sarah documented the incident in her safety report, carefully noting the timeline that revealed who'd actually prevented the crisis. But when Harold praised his son's natural talent and innovative thinking, neither Frank nor Sarah spoke up. Their silence carried the bitter taste of economic necessity. Jobs in offshore drilling weren't easy to replace, especially when crossing powerful families like the Brennans. That evening, as Tommy celebrated his fictitious achievement with expensive whiskey in his private quarters, I stood alone on the platform's edge, watching stars reflect off dark waters. The ocean's vastness reminded me how small individual justice seemed when measured against forces beyond personal control. Yet somewhere in that infinite darkness, currents continued flowing according to laws that couldn't be bought, inherited, or faked. The seeds of betrayal had been planted, watered by privilege, and fertilized by unchecked power. I just hadn't realized how deep their roots would grow. The weeks following Tommy's manufactured triumph brought subtle but unmistakable changes to our platform's operations. I began noticing discrepancies in maintenance reports, safety protocols mysteriously altered without proper authorization, and crew members looking increasingly uncomfortable during Tommy's self-appointed leadership moments. My suspicions crystallized during a routine review of quarterly safety improvements. The comprehensive pressure monitoring system I'd developed over 18 months had apparently been redesigned by Tommy according to the latest filing with corporate headquarters. My innovations in wellhead pressure prediction, which had prevented 6 potential incidents, were now attributed to his revolutionary thinking and cutting-edge engineering solutions. Linda Walsh made her first appearance on our platform like a storm front moving across clear skies. Harold's sister and company vice president possessed the calculating intelligence that Harold sometimes lacked, her gray eyes cataloging potential threats to family interests with predatory precision. At 42, she'd built her reputation by eliminating obstacles to Brennan family control, whether through legal maneuvering, strategic intimidation, or simple corporate warfare. Diane, I've been reviewing your work history, she said during our mandatory meeting in the platform's conference room. Impressive technical skills, but I'm concerned about your ability to adapt to evolving leadership structures. Her words carried implications that chilled me more than Gulf winter winds. The evolving leadership structures meant displacing competent personnel with family members regardless of qualifications or safety consequences. Tommy had been documenting our interactions through carefully edited reports that painted him as the innovative problem solver while reducing me to a resistant subordinate who struggled to embrace new methodologies. His emails to Harold, which I discovered through an inadvertent carbon copy error, revealed their systematic plan to transition operational control to family leadership within 6 months. Dad Diane's old school thinking is holding back progress, Tommy wrote in one particularly damning message. She's territorial about her systems and resistant to improvements. The crew needs leadership that isn't afraid of innovation. The irony burned like acid in my throat. Every innovation he claimed credit for had emerged from my research, my late nights, calculating pressure differentials, my careful analysis of drilling patterns that others dismissed as unimportant. But Harold's responses showed complete faith in his son's fabricated competence. Jake noticed my increasing distress during our shore rotations, his concern growing as I described the systematic undermining of my authority and reputation. His research vessel often passed our platform, and he'd begun documenting unusual environmental readings that suggested safety protocols weren't being properly followed. You need to document everything, he insisted, during one of our waterfront dinners in Galveston. Keep copies of your real work time-stamped communications, anything that proves your contributions. His suggestion proved prophetic when Dr. Marcus Petrov arrived for a surprise safety inspection. The 55-year-old federal inspector had built his career on maintaining offshore drilling standards, his reputation for thoroughness making him both respected and feared throughout the industry. His weathered face carried the gravity of someone who'd investigated too many preventable disasters. Your recent safety reports show remarkable improvements, he told me privately after reviewing our documentation. But some of the technical details don't match the signatures on the filing paperwork. I realized he'd detected the same discrepancies that had been troubling me, the subtle differences between my actual work and Tommy's claimed contributions. But before I could respond, Linda appeared with Harold and Tommy, their combined presence shifting the inspection's dynamic away from technical accuracy toward political protection. The devastating blow came during our quarterly presentation to potential investors, a critical meeting that would determine funding for the Deepwater expansion project. I'd spent weeks preparing detailed technical presentations about pressure management innovations that could revolutionize deepwater drilling safety. Tommy stood at the conference room's head, my charts and graphs displayed behind him as he explained his revolutionary pressure monitoring system to a room full of impressed investors. Every word he spoke described my work, my calculations, my innovations, while I sat silently in the back row watching my professional life being stolen in real time. This predictive pressure analysis represents the future of offshore drilling safety, he proclaimed, gesturing toward equations I derived through months of painstaking research. By analyzing micro variations in wellhead pressure patterns, we can predict potential blowouts days before traditional methods would detect any problems. The investors' enthusiasm was immediate and substantial. They saw Tommy as the brilliant young engineer who would lead their investments into a new era of safe, profitable drilling. Harold beamed with paternal pride as his son fielded technical questions using answers I'd provided during our training sessions. When I finally gathered courage to speak, Harold's response crushed any remaining hope for justice. I appreciate Diane's contributions to our team, he said with condescending politeness. But I think we need to focus on forward-thinking leadership rather than dwelling on past methodologies. His words branded me as obsolete, a relic clinging to outdated approaches, while his son represented progress and innovation. The investors nodded approvingly, convinced that Tommy's youth and apparent brilliance justified their confidence. Linda's satisfied smile told me this humiliation had been carefully orchestrated. My expertise had been harvested, packaged, and redistributed to benefit the Brennan family, while my actual contributions vanished into corporate amnesia. That night alone in my Houston apartment, I stared at copies of my original research while trying to comprehend how completely I had been erased from my own work. The pressure equations covering my desk represented years of dedication, countless hours of analysis, and genuine innovations that could save lives. Yet officially, none of it belonged to me anymore. Jake found me crying over my computer spreadsheets full of pressure calculations glowing on the screen like digital tombstones marking the death of my professional identity. His arms around me provided the only warmth in a world that had suddenly turned cold and hostile. They can steal credit for your work, he whispered, but they can't steal your knowledge or your integrity. His words offered comfort, but I wondered if knowledge and integrity mattered when power and privilege controlled the narrative. The Gulf of Mexico continued its ancient rhythms outside my window, indifferent to human injustice, while I planned how to survive in an industry that had just declared me expendable. Returning to the platform after Tommy's corporate triumph felt like entering a parallel universe where competence had become liability and experience translated to obstruction. Tommy's new authority manifested immediately through reckless decisions that would have been laughable if they weren't potentially lethal. His first major modification involved overriding pressure warnings that I'd calibrated through months of careful observation. The system I designed provided early alerts when drilling operations approached dangerous pressure differentials, but Tommy dismissed these warnings as overcautious programming that limited operational efficiency. "We're not here to play it safe," he announced during morning crew briefings that had transformed from technical discussions into promotional presentations. "We're here to push boundaries and maximize extraction rates." Frank approached me privately after Tommy ordered drilling operations to continue despite pressure readings that exceeded our established safety margins. 23 years of experience had taught Frank to recognize when ambition and overruled wisdom, and Tommy's commands triggered every alarm bell in his seasoned judgment. "Diane, this kid's going to get people killed," Frank whispered during a brief moment when Tommy was occupied with his satellite phone. Yesterday, he told me to ignore pressure fluctuations because they were probably just instrument errors. Instrument errors don't register across 6 different monitoring systems simultaneously. Sarah's growing concern became evident through her increasingly detailed incident reports. Every dangerous decision, every ignored safety protocol, every bypassed warning system found its way into her documentation. But Tommy had begun reviewing and editing these reports before they reached corporate headquarters, transforming accurate safety concerns into glowing efficiency assessments. "I can't file honest reports anymore," Sarah confided during one of our brief private conversations. "Tommy changes everything to make his operations look successful regardless of actual risk levels." The crew's morale deteriorated as experienced workers watched their expertise being dismissed by someone who couldn't distinguish between drilling mud viscosity and chocolate pudding consistency. Men who'd spent decades learning to read the ocean's moods and the Earth's pressures found themselves taking orders from someone whose idea of pressure management came from textbook theories rather than real-world consequences. Pete Bradley represented the worst aspect of Tommy's influence. At 29, this ambitious young engineer had abandoned his technical training in favor of political positioning, recognizing that advancement under Tommy required loyalty over competence. Pete began actively undermining experienced crew members, reporting their resistance to new methodologies while positioning himself as Tommy's most enthusiastic supporter. "The old ways of doing things are holding us back," Pete declared during a crew meeting where Tommy praised his innovative thinking and forward-looking attitude. "We need to embrace risk if we want to achieve breakthrough results." The specialized pressure codes I developed for our new deepwater well represented my most critical innovation, mathematical formulas that predicted pressure behavior in geological formations unique to our drilling site. These codes existed only in my encrypted files and my memory, as I'd never completed the formal documentation process due to ongoing testing and refinement. The deepwater well presented challenges unlike anything we'd previously encountered. 3 miles beneath the ocean floor, pressure conditions operated according to complex principles that required constant adjustment and real-time calculation. My codes translated raw pressure data into actionable information, providing the predictive capability necessary for safe drilling operations. Tommy's ignorance of these critical calculations became apparent during a routine drilling operation when pressure readings began showing unusual patterns. The formations we were penetrating contained pockets of super-pressurized gas and oil that could explosive violently if disturbed incorrectly. "Those readings are within acceptable ranges," Tommy insisted when I pointed out concerning pressure variations. "The computer models show we're operating well below maximum thresholds." His computer models relied on generic pressure calculations that couldn't account for the specific geological characteristics our well was encountering. My specialized codes revealed pressure patterns that standard models couldn't interpret, subtle warning signs that preceded dangerous pressure spikes. The crisis erupted during a shift change when pressure readings suddenly jumped beyond normal parameters. Two crew members, Danny Walsh and Roberto Martinez, were positioned near the wellhead when drilling mud began forcing its way through relief valves with explosive violence. Tommy froze as alarms screamed throughout the platform, his theoretical training providing no guidance for the life-threatening emergency unfolding before him. Pressurized drilling fluid shot from the wellhead like a geyser, creating a slippery, dangerous environment where one wrong step could send workers plunging into machinery or over the platform's edge. I abandoned my monitoring station and raced to the manual controls, my hands implementing emergency pressure relief procedures while calculating the precise valve sequences needed to prevent catastrophic blowout. Years of experience guided my responses as I rerouted pressure flows through backup systems, gradually bringing the violent eruption under control. Danny and Roberto owed their lives to emergency protocols I had drilled into the crew during countless safety meetings. Their quick response to my shouted commands kept them clear of the most dangerous zones while I worked to stabilize the pressure systems. Within 20 minutes, the crisis passed, leaving behind only the acrid smell of drilling chemicals and the memory of how close we'd come to losing lives. Tommy emerged from his paralysis with a completely revised version of events that painted my intervention as dangerous interference with his emergency management. Diane's unauthorized actions nearly escalated a manageable situation into a major incident. He reported to Harold via satellite link, his voice carrying the confident authority of someone who'd never felt the rig shake beneath his feet as pressurized mud searched for escape routes. Harold's response arrived within hours, a formal disciplinary action citing my failure to follow proper chain of command during emergency operations and reckless endangerment of crew safety through unauthorized system modifications. The crew members I'd saved were interviewed about the incident, but their accounts were edited to support Tommy's fictional narrative. That evening, as Tommy celebrated his successful crisis management with expensive champagne in his private quarters, I stood alone on the platform watching sunset colors reflect off waters that had nearly become the gravesite for good men whose only mistake was trusting incompetent leadership. Frank found me there as darkness fell, his presence providing silent solidarity in the face of injustice that seemed to grow more brazen each day. The ocean's endless horizon reminded us both that truth existed beyond corporate politics, though it sometimes felt unreachable from where we stood. "This can't continue," Frank said quietly, his words carrying the weight of decades spent keeping people alive in one of the world's most dangerous professions. I knew he was right, but I also knew that Harold Brennan's wealth and influence made challenging his son's authority nearly impossible. The pressure codes locked in my memory represented the only advantage I possessed, knowledge that couldn't be stolen or redistributed without my cooperation. The question was whether I'd have the courage to use that advantage when the time came, and whether I could live with the consequences of either choice. Harold's summons to Houston headquarters arrived like a court order, its formal language barely concealing the corporate execution being planned. The marble lobby of Brennan Petroleum felt like a mausoleum as I walked toward the elevator, my reflection in polished floors, showing a woman whose career was about to be systematically destroyed by people who valued bloodline over brilliance. Linda's conference room had been carefully staged for maximum intimidation. Legal documents covered the mahogany table, their precisely arranged stacks suggesting months of preparation for this moment. Harold sat at the head of the table with the satisfied expression of a man who'd never questioned his right to crush anyone who threatened his family's interests. Tommy occupied the chair to his father's right, his smug smile revealing someone who believed he'd earned his position through merit rather than genetics. The expensive suit couldn't disguise his fundamental incompetence, but it provided the costume necessary for his starring role in this corporate theater. Diane, we need to address some serious concerns about your performance and attitude. Harold began, his tone carrying the false regret of someone who'd already decided my fate. Your resistance to new leadership and unwillingness to adapt to changing methodologies have created a disruptive work environment. The fabricated evidence Linda presented painted me as a bitter territorial employee whose declining skills posed a safety risk to rig operations. Every incident from the past 6 months had been reframed to support their narrative, with my actual contributions erased and replaced by fictional accounts of incompetence and insubordination. On March 15th, you ignored direct orders during an emergency situation. Linda read from her prepared statement, potentially endangering crew members through reckless system modifications. The March 15th incident was my life-saving intervention during Tommy's pressure system failure, but their version transformed heroism into hazardous interference. Each accusation built upon the previous lie, creating a fictional foundation for the destruction they were about to inflict. Your technical assessments have become increasingly unreliable, Harold continued, and several crew members have expressed concerns about your judgment during critical operations. The crew members he referenced were Pete Bradley and two other junior engineers who'd aligned themselves with Tommy for career advancement. Their statements, carefully coached and edited, provided the testimony needed to justify my removal. Tommy's contribution to the proceedings revealed his complete lack of understanding about the technical systems he was supposedly mastering. His critique of my outdated pressure management protocols demonstrated ignorance so profound that I almost laughed despite the gravity of the situation. Diane's methods might have worked in the past, he said, with the confidence of someone who'd never successfully managed pressure in anything more complex than a bicycle tire. But modern drilling requires innovative approaches that she seems unable or unwilling to embrace. The offer they presented carried the cruel generosity of conquerors who wanted to appear merciful while ensuring complete victory. I could accept a demotion to junior engineer at half my current salary, working under Tommy's supervision while helping him implement improved operational procedures, or face termination for cause that would destroy my reputation throughout the industry. We're being generous, Harold explained, considering the documentation we have regarding your performance issues. Their documentation was fiction, but fiction backed by lawyers' money and political connections that made challenging their narrative nearly impossible. A wrongful termination lawsuit would bankrupt me while barely denting their resources, and their influence with industry associations would ensure that fighting them would end my career more effectively than accepting their humiliation. Jake's encouragement to fight legally reflected his faith in justice systems that functioned differently for people with Harold's wealth and connections. Professor Helen Martinez's offer of a teaching position at the University of Houston provided an escape route that would preserve my dignity while abandoning the career I'd built through years of dedication and sacrifice. Dr. Petrov's secret contact came too late to change the immediate situation, but his offer to testify about safety violations provided a glimmer of hope for eventual accountability. His investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic protocol violations and falsified safety reports, but corporate lawyers had delayed his formal review pending administrative procedures. Your choice is simple, Harold concluded, as the meeting reached its crescendo. Accept our generous offer and help Tommy implement his revolutionary improvements, or leave immediately and face the consequences of your documented performance failures. The moment of ultimate betrayal arrived when Harold announced Tommy's immediate assumption of full control over the deep water project. The most dangerous phase of drilling would begin within days, penetrating geological formations that required the specialized pressure codes I'd developed through months of analysis and testing. Tommy has demonstrated exceptional capability in pressure management, Harold declared with paternal pride that ignored every dangerous mistake his son had made. His innovative approaches will maximize efficiency while maintaining appropriate safety standards. When I tried to explain the critical importance of the specialized codes needed for deep water operations, Harold's dismissal carried the casual cruelty of someone who'd never valued anything he couldn't own or control. "I'm sure Tommy can handle any technical challenges," he said, with the absolute confidence of ignorance. "He's already proven his capability far exceeds previous methods." Tommy's arrogant declaration that he didn't need my outdated techniques revealed the terrifying combination of incompetence and overconfidence that would soon threaten dozens of lives. His dismissal of my warnings about pressure pocket volatility and specialized monitoring requirements demonstrated complete ignorance of the forces he was preparing to unleash. The choice I faced in that sterile conference room would haunt me forever: stay and watch people die under Tommy's reckless leadership, or leave and hope they'd realize their mistake before catastrophic failure claimed innocent lives. The pressure codes locked in my memory represented the only thing standing between competent operation and potential disaster. My resignation letter was brief and professional, offering no explanation for my departure beyond pursuing other opportunities. I couldn't bring myself to warn them explicitly about the codes, clinging to the naive hope that they'd discover their need for my expertise before reaching the dangerous pressure zones. Walking out of that building felt like abandoning ship while knowing the crew was sailing toward a hurricane they couldn't see coming. The Houston skyline stretched before me as I drove home, its towers and refineries representing an industry that had just declared my 8 years of dedication worthless compared to the value of family connections. That night, Jake held me while I cried for the career I'd lost and the men I'd left behind. The Gulf of Mexico continued its ancient rhythms beyond our apartment windows, indifferent to human ambition and corporate injustice, while I wondered whether I'd made a terrible mistake that would cost lives I could have saved. Rebuilding a life after professional destruction required confronting the bitter reality that expertise meant nothing without political protection. My apartment became a fortress of isolation where I wrestled with guilt over abandoning the crew while struggling to construct a future from the wreckage Harold Brennan had created. Dr. Petrov's investigation provided the only beacon of hope in months of darkness. His methodical documentation of safety violations and falsified reports created a foundation for federal intervention, but progress moved with bureaucratic slowness that felt agonizing when measured against the approaching danger on the platform. "The evidence is substantial," he assured me during one of our clandestine meetings at a coffee shop near the University of Houston. "Tommy's safety modifications violate multiple federal regulations, and the falsified reports constitute criminal fraud. But building a case against people with the Brennan family's resources requires absolute precision." Jake's research vessel provided unexpected support for the investigation when his environmental monitoring equipment detected unusual chemical signatures near our former drilling site. The readings suggested that safety protocols were being bypassed, creating pollution patterns that correlated with reckless operational practices. The water samples show drilling fluid concentrations that exceed permitted levels, Jake explained while analyzing data in his cramped shipboard laboratory. "Either their containment systems are failing, or they are deliberately dumping waste to avoid proper disposal costs." His environmental evidence complemented Dr. Petrov's safety documentation, creating a comprehensive picture of systematic regulatory violations. But translating evidence into enforcement action required navigating political networks where the Brennan family wielded considerable influence. Professor Martinez's teaching offer represented a dignified retreat from industry warfare, but accepting it felt like admitting defeat to people who'd stolen my work and endangered lives for their personal profit. The University of Houston's Petroleum Engineering Department would provide intellectual sanctuary, but it couldn't erase the knowledge that dangerous incompetence was being rewarded while competent professionals were punished. Frank's secret communications revealed the chaos unfolding on the platform under Tommy's leadership. Several experienced crew members had quit rather than work under conditions they considered suicidal, and those remaining operated under constant stress from watching safety protocols being systematically ignored. Danny and Roberto put in their notice yesterday, Frank reported during a brief phone conversation from a Galveston payphone. They said working for Tommy feels like playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. Sarah's demotion from safety coordinator to equipment inspector represented Harold's response to her persistent documentation of dangerous practices. Her replacement, a recent college graduate with no offshore experience, rubber-stamped every modification Tommy proposed while contributing nothing to operational safety. Sarah's being transferred to a supply platform next week, Frank continued. Tommy claimed her negative attitude was undermining crew morale and operational efficiency. The financial pressure driving Harold's desperate decisions became clear through an industry publications that chronicled Brennan Petroleum's mounting debt crisis. The Deepwater project represented their last chance for financial survival, with investors threatening to withdraw support unless drilling operations achieved specific production targets within strict deadlines. They're facing bankruptcy if this project fails, Jake observed after researching the company's financial filings. That explains why Harold's willing to risk everything on Tommy's imaginary expertise. The approaching storm season added meteorological danger to the operational hazards Tommy was creating. Gulf hurricanes could transform routine drilling operations into life-threatening emergencies, requiring experienced leadership and flawless safety protocols to protect crews from nature's violence. Tommy's decision to accelerate drilling operations despite weather forecasts predicting severe storms revealed his complete ignorance of offshore operational realities. The pressure pocket I'd identified months earlier would be reached during the most dangerous weather period, when high seas and strong winds made emergency responses nearly impossible. My specialized pressure codes represented the only defense against catastrophic blowout when Tommy's drilling reached the volatile formations 3 miles below the ocean floor. The mathematical algorithms I developed translated subtle pressure variations into predictive models that could prevent explosive decompression of superpressurized oil and gas reserves. The codes aren't just numbers, I explained to Jake during one of our evening discussions about the approaching crisis. They're like a translation key that converts geological language into human understanding. Without them, Tommy will be drilling blind into formations that could explode with the force of atomic weapons. The federal investigation I'd initiated with Dr. Petrov's help mysteriously stalled when Harold's political connections intervened at the highest levels of regulatory bureaucracy. Congressmen who'd received substantial campaign contributions from Brennan Petroleum suddenly discovered urgent concerns about regulatory overreach and job-killing environmental extremism. The investigation has been suspended, pending administrative review, Dr. Petrov informed me with barely concealed disgust. Apparently, our evidence requires additional verification before formal proceedings can continue. The surveillance photographs arrived like a declaration of war, showing Jake and me during supposedly private moments throughout Houston. The anonymous note accompanying the images carried a simple message: stop interfering with legitimate business operations. Harold's willingness to use intimidation revealed how seriously he viewed my potential threat to his family's control. The photographs demonstrated surveillance capabilities that extended far beyond normal corporate security, suggesting connections to private investigation firms that specialized in neutralizing business opponents. They're watching everything we do, I told Jake while examining the invasive images of our daily activities. Harold's not just stealing credit for my work anymore. He's treating me like an enemy who needs to be controlled. The realization that I'd become a target, rather than simply a discarded employee, changed everything. Harold's fear of my knowledge proved that he understood the critical importance of my pressure codes even while publicly dismissing my expertise as obsolete. My transformation from victim to threat filled me with grim satisfaction. The same knowledge they'd tried to steal and dismiss had become their greatest vulnerability. Tommy's incompetence ensured that reaching the pressure pocket without my codes would trigger the kind of disaster that would destroy the Brennan family's empire more effectively than any lawsuit or investigation. The question was whether I could live with the consequences of allowing preventable catastrophe to unfold, knowing that innocent men would pay the price for Harold's arrogance and Tommy's incompetence. The Gulf of Mexico stretched endlessly beyond my apartment windows, its dark waters holding secrets that demanded respect from those brave or foolish enough to disturb its depths. Storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, both meteorological and human, while I waited for the inevitable phone call that would force me to choose between justice and mercy. The storm arrived with biblical fury, transforming the Gulf of Mexico into a cauldron of 30-foot waves and 70-mile-per-hour winds that should have shut down all drilling operations according to every safety protocol ever written. But Harold's financial desperation and Tommy's arrogant ignorance combined to create the perfect conditions for disaster as they pushed forward with the most dangerous phase of deep-water drilling. My apartment windows rattled with each thunderclap, while I monitored weather reports that painted the Gulf in angry reds and purples. The storm system stretched for hundreds of miles, its rotation creating seas that would challenge even the most experienced crews under normal circumstances. Tommy's decision to continue drilling operations during such conditions violated every rule of offshore safety. Frank's first call came at 9:30, his voice barely audible through static and wind noise, as he described conditions on the platform that bordered on insanity. Tommy had ordered drilling to continue despite weather warnings that had prompted every other rig in the Gulf to shut down operations and secure equipment. "Diane, this kid's lost his mind," Frank shouted over the screaming wind. "We've got waves washing over the lower deck, and he's still pushing the drill deeper. The pressure readings are going crazy, but he keeps saying the storm is just causing temporary fluctuations." The pressure readings Frank described matched exactly what my calculations had predicted when drilling reached the volatile formation 3 miles below the seafloor. The geological pocket contained super-pressurized hydrocarbons that had been building pressure for millions of years, waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb their equilibrium without proper safety measures. Sarah's desperate attempt to reach me at 10:15 revealed the complete breakdown of safety protocols under Tommy's reckless leadership. Her voice cracked with terror as she described pressure readings that exceeded every safety margin we'd established, while Tommy dismissed her concerns as weather-related instrument errors. "He shut down the automatic safety systems," Sarah sobbed through the phone connection. "Tommy said they were interfering with drilling efficiency. Diane, the pressure monitors are showing readings I've never seen before, and we don't have any of your specialized codes to interpret them." The specialized codes locked in my memory represented the only way to safely navigate the pressure conditions Tommy was creating. My mathematical algorithms could translate the chaotic readings into actionable information, providing the predictive capability necessary to prevent explosive decompression that would turn the rig into a floating bomb. Pete Bradley's panicked call at 11:45 marked the moment when even Tommy's most loyal supporters recognized the approaching catastrophe. The ambitious young engineer who'd sacrificed his principles for political advancement now faced the consequences of supporting incompetent leadership. "Diane, you have to help us," Pete begged, his voice breaking with terror. "The pressure systems are showing readings that don't match any of our reference materials. Tommy keeps insisting everything's under control, but the entire rig is shaking and we can hear something roaring deep underground." The roaring Pete described was the sound of pressurized hydrocarbons searching for escape routes as drilling operations disturbed formations that required delicate handling. Without my codes to guide their responses, the crew was essentially performing surgery, while blindfolded, their every action increasing the risk of catastrophic failure. My phone remained silent for 20 minutes as I wrestled with the moral implications of the choice before me. Tommy's arrogance and Harold's greed had created this crisis, but innocent men would pay the ultimate price if I allowed pride to override conscience. The pressure codes in my memory could save lives, even if it meant rescuing people who'd betrayed and humiliated me. Tommy's call at midnight shattered the silence like a gunshot, his voice reduced to broken sobs as he finally confronted the consequences of his incompetence. The confident young man who'd stolen credit for my work now faced a disaster that his theoretical training couldn't begin to address. Diane, please, he cried, his words barely intelligible through tears and static. The alarms are screaming, and I don't understand what any of the readings mean. The pressure gauges are showing numbers I've never seen before, and Frank keeps saying, "We need your codes." The moment of ultimate power had arrived, delivering the vindication I dreamed of during months of humiliation and betrayal. Tommy's admission of need proved everything I'd tried to tell Harold about the critical importance of experience over connections. His tears validated and every sleepless night I'd spent developing the codes he had dismissed as obsolete. The whole rig is shaking, Tommy sobbed, his voice cracking with terror. Something's wrong with the pressure systems, and I don't know how to fix it. Everyone's looking at me like I'm supposed to know what to do, but I don't understand any of this. My response carried the cold satisfaction of absolute victory. I know, I whispered, letting him absorb the implications of his complete dependence on knowledge he'd rejected. Run! The word hung in the air like a death sentence. As I ended the call, my finger hovering over the phone while conscience battled with justified anger. Tommy's terrified breathing in the silence before disconnection provided the sweetest sound I'd heard in months, proof that incompetence eventually faced consequences that money couldn't buy. But the satisfaction lasted only seconds before images of Frank, Sarah, and 30 other innocent people flooded my consciousness. They didn't deserve to die for Tommy's arrogance or Harold's greed. Their only mistake was working for people who valued profit over the principles and family connections over competence. Jake found me staring at the phone, my hand trembling, as I struggled with the weight of holding dozens of lives in my memory. The specialized codes that could save them required only a phone call to share, but using them would rescue the same people who destroyed my career and stolen my work. You have to call them back, Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the moral clarity I'd lost in my desire for revenge. This isn't about Tommy or Harold anymore. It's about the crew members who trusted you to keep them safe. The realization struck like lightning that my true loyalty had never been to corporate politics or personal advancement, but to the fundamental principle that knowledge existed to protect lives, not to settle scores. The pressure codes in my memory belonged to every person on that rig, regardless of their role in my professional destruction. The Gulf hurricane continued its assault on the Texas coast, while I prepared to abandon my moment of perfect revenge in favor of something more important than justice. Sometimes the greatest victory required sacrificing the satisfaction of watching enemies destroy themselves, choosing instead to preserve the lives they'd endangered through their arrogance and incompetence. My finger moved toward the phone's redial button as another thunderclap shook the apartment windows. The storm outside paled in comparison to the tempest of pressurized hydrocarbons threatening to erupt from the Earth's depths, where 32 souls waited for someone to choose mercy over vengeance. The helicopter ride through the hurricane felt like flying into the mouth of hell itself, the aircraft buffeted by winds that should have grounded all air traffic, while I clutched my emergency gear and prayed we'd reach the platform before Tommy's incompetence triggered an explosion visible from space. The Gulf stretched below us in angry chaos, 30-foot waves topped with foam that glowed phosphorescent in the darkness. My decision to return had come the moment I realized that true victory meant saving lives, rather than satisfying revenge. Tommy's tearful phone call had delivered the justice I'd craved, but letting innocent people die to punish guilty ones would make me complicit in their destruction. The pressure codes locked in my memory belonged to every soul on that rig, regardless of their role in my betrayal. The platform emerged from the storm like a ghost ship, its lights flickering against walls of water that crashed across the lower decks with bone-crushing force. Emergency alarms screamed their warnings into the wind while the entire structure vibrated with the ominous rumbling of pressurized hydrocarbons seeking escape routes from 3 miles below the ocean floor. Frank met me at the landing pad, his weathered face showing relief, mixed with desperate urgency, as he helped me secure my equipment against the hurricane's assault. 23 years of offshore experience had taught him to recognize when natural forces combined with human incompetence to create perfect storms of destruction. "Diane, thank God you're here," he shouted over the screaming wind. "Tommy's locked himself in his quarters crying, and the pressure readings are beyond anything in our reference materials. We've been flying blind for 2 hours, just praying nothing explodes before you arrived." The control room presented a scene of barely controlled panic as crew members struggled with monitoring systems displaying readings that exceeded every safety parameter we'd established. The specialized algorithms I developed over months of research were the only tools capable of translating chaotic pressure data into actionable information. Sarah's tearful embrace conveyed gratitude mixed with shame as she realized how completely they'd underestimated the critical importance of my expertise. Her demotion and humiliation had been punishment for loyalty to safety principles that could have prevented this crisis. "I'm sorry," she whispered through tears of relief and regret. "We should have fought harder for you. We should have stood up to Harold and Tommy instead of protecting our jobs while they destroyed yours." My fingers flew across the control panel as I implemented emergency protocols using pressure codes that existed nowhere except in my memory and encrypted files. The mathematical formulas translated raw data into predictive models, revealing the precise sequence of adjustments needed to prevent catastrophic blowout. The pressure pocket we disturbed contained enough explosive energy to destroy the platform and create an environmental disaster visible from satellite imagery. But my codes provided roadmaps for navigating the geological minefield, offering pathways to safety that required split-second timing and absolute precision. Rewrote pressure through backup manifold 7, I called to Frank while calculating relief valve sequences that would gradually reduce dangerous accumulation. Sarah, activate emergency mud pumping system and increase viscosity to specification delta 9. Each command built upon complex mathematical relationships that my specialized codes made visible, transforming incomprehensible readings into manageable operational challenges. Years of experience guided my responses as I orchestrated the delicate process of controlling forces that could vaporize our platform in milliseconds. Tommy emerged from his quarters as dawn broke over calming seas, his face showing the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd confronted his own incompetence and found it nearly fatal. The arrogant young man who'd stolen credit for my work now understood the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical expertise. "Diane, I'm sorry," he sobbed, his words carrying genuine remorse, mixed with terror at how close he'd come to causing mass death. "I thought I understood everything, but I didn't know anything. I nearly killed everyone because I was too proud to admit I needed help." Harold's helicopter arrived as we completed the emergency pressure stabilization, his face showing the gray pallor of someone who'd watched his family empire nearly collapse due to nepotistic incompetence. The platform that represented his life's work had survived only through the intervention of the woman he'd tried to destroy. The investors' emergency meeting convened in Houston, while federal investigators swarmed the platform. Dr. Petrov's documentation providing the foundation for criminal charges that Harold's political connections couldn't deflect. The evidence of systematic safety violations and falsified reports had become undeniable when combined with the near-catastrophic failure that almost claimed dozens of lives. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lead investor announced to the assembled board of directors, "recent events have demonstrated conclusively that Brennan Family Management represents an unacceptable risk to our investment and public safety. Tommy's public confession before federal investigators marked his transformation from arrogant heir to humbled student who finally understood the deadly consequences of unearned authority. His testimony about pressure system modifications and ignored safety warnings provided prosecutors with evidence for multiple felony charges. I falsified safety reports to make my performance look better. Tommy admitted to the federal grand jury, his voice breaking with shame and genuine remorse. I ignored warnings from experienced personnel because I thought my degree made me smarter than people who'd been doing this work for decades. Harold's criminal trial became a landmark case in corporate accountability, his conviction on charges of safety violations and investor fraud sending shockwaves through the entire offshore drilling industry. The man who'd wielded absolute power found himself facing federal prison while watching his family empire disintegrate. The investor's offer to assume control of the entire operation represented vindication beyond my wildest dreams of justice. The deep water project that had nearly failed under incompetent leadership would now proceed under my direction, implementing safety innovations that could revolutionize offshore drilling practices. Jake's environmental monitoring data proved crucial in establishing the full scope of Brennan family violations, his research providing evidence that supported criminal prosecutions while documenting the environmental damage caused by reckless operational practices. Your girlfriend's courage saved more than just lives on that platform, Dr. Petrov told Jake during the federal investigation. Her willingness to return during the crisis provided evidence that made prosecuting these criminals possible. Frank's promotion to platform operations manager represented overdue recognition for decades of dedicated service, while Sarah's appointment as chief safety officer ensured that competence rather than connections would guide future operational decisions. Pete Bradley's cooperation with federal investigators earned him a second chance under strict supervision. The Diane Morrison Foundation for Offshore Safety Education emerged from the settlement funds awarded after Harold's conviction, providing scholarships and training programs that would prevent nepotism from endangering lives in the future. Every young engineer would learn that expertise couldn't be inherited and safety couldn't be faked. Tommy's genuine transformation during his probationary period surprised everyone, including me. His court-ordered service under my supervision revealed someone capable of learning from devastating mistakes when humility replaced arrogance. He became living proof that even privileged incompetence could evolve into useful competence through proper training and hard work. I want to earn the right to be here, Tommy said during one of our training sessions, his words carrying sincerity that his father had never demonstrated. Not because of my name, but because I finally understand what this work really means. The new safety protocols we implemented became industry standards, preventing the kind of pressure-related disasters that had nearly claimed our platform. My pressure monitoring codes were integrated into federal regulations, ensuring that future drilling operations would benefit from hard-won knowledge that had almost died with their creator. Standing on the platform deck 1 year later, I watched sunset paint the Gulf in colors that reminded me why I'd chosen this dangerous, demanding profession. The ocean's vastness represented challenges that required genuine expertise and uncompromising integrity qualities that couldn't be purchased or inherited but had to be earned through dedication and sacrifice. Jake joined me at the platform's edge, his research vessel anchored nearby as he continued monitoring the environmental recovery that followed implementation of proper safety protocols. Our relationship had deepened through shared trials that tested both our professional principles and personal commitments. You saved more than just lives that night, he said quietly, his words carrying love mixed with admiration for the courage required to choose mercy over vengeance. You prove that knowledge belongs to everyone, not just the people who try to steal it. The crew gathered for our weekly safety meeting, their faces showing the relaxed confidence that came from working under competent leadership that valued their lives above profit margins. Frank's weathered smile reflected satisfaction with operational conditions that prioritized safety over shortcuts, while Sarah's comprehensive reports documented the dramatic improvements in overall platform safety. Tommy's progress during his supervised training proved that even the most privileged incompetence could evolve into useful capability when pride surrendered to genuine learning. His transformation from arrogant heir to dedicated student provided hope that future generations might escape the toxic legacy of nepotistic entitlement. The pressure codes that had once existed only in my memory were now documented in federal safety manuals, ensuring that critical knowledge would survive individual careers to protect future generations of offshore workers. My innovations had become permanent safeguards against the kind of disasters that incompetent leadership could trigger. Dr. Petrov's continued oversight ensured that safety regulations were enforced without regard for family connections or political influence, his reputation for integrity, providing protection for workers who might otherwise face retaliation for reporting violations. The federal prosecutions resulting from our platform crisis established legal precedents that made corporate executives personally liable for safety violations, ending the era when wealthy families could endanger lives without facing meaningful consequences for their reckless decisions. My reflection on that transformative year revealed how standing up for principles, even at tremendous personal cost, ultimately led to justice that exceeded my wildest dreams of vindication. The pressure codes I'd nearly taken to my grave became tools for protecting countless future lives, while incompetent leadership faced accountability that wealth couldn't purchase. The Gulf of Mexico stretched endlessly before us, its depths holding secrets that would always demand respect from those brave enough to pursue them. But now those secrets would be explored by competent professionals who understood that expertise couldn't be inherited, safety couldn't be faked, and knowledge belonged to everyone willing to earn it through dedication and integrity. The most profound lesson emerged from realizing that true victory required choosing mercy over vengeance, using knowledge to preserve life rather than settling scores. The pressure codes in my memory had saved more than just the people who betrayed me. They'd preserved the principle that competence must always triumph over privilege when human lives hang in the balance. Sometimes the greatest justice comes not from watching enemies destroy themselves, but from preventing that destruction while ensuring they face accountability for their actions. Tommy's transformation. Harold's conviction and the industry's safety improvements represented vindication more complete than any personal revenge could have provided. The foundation we established would ensure that future generations of engineers learned these lessons without paying the devastating price that almost claimed our platform. Excellence would be rewarded, incompetence would be identified and corrected, and safety would never again be sacrificed to protect family pride or political connections. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where doing the right thing meant helping people who had wronged you? I'd love to hear about times when you chose principles over personal satisfaction. Please, share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what you would have done in my situation. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of competence over connections in dangerous professions. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that knowledge and integrity will always triumph over privilege and corruption when we have the courage to stand up for what's right.